I think we're going to go ahead and get started. There might be a few people yet joining. Thank you so much for joining us. We are excited to host a webinar focused on the financial services and insurance industries. Today, we will focus on real-world use cases for experience analytics, also known as Tealeaf. Before we dive right into the webinar, I'm going to take just a few minutes to introduce Acoustic as a company and just run through a few housekeeping items. If you are not familiar with Acoustic, we are a marketing and analytics-focused technology company. We offer a product portfolio that includes a campaign solution, content platform, personalization, and analytics suite that is comprised of digital analytics, journey analytics, and Tealeaf that we're focusing on today. And all of our solutions are connected across the ecosystem to exchange data and events. A few housekeeping items. Number one, that we are recording this webinar. You will be muted just to keep background noise to a minimum. And we are not going to be taking Q&A at the end of the webinar. That said, please feel free to enter your questions into the chat, and we will be sure to follow up offline. And I'm now going to turn it over to Dave Schneider, our Tealeaf guru. He's going to introduce himself and get to the fun stuff.
All right. Welcome, everybody. My name is Dave Schneider. I'll be presenting today. We will be talking about Tealeaf and focusing on, financial and insurance-related use cases. A little bit about myself. My background is primarily IT. Started off as a developer, worked my way up, became a development manager, ultimately landed at a financial institution based in the Midwest. I think we have, I hear some background noise. I don't know if we could make sure the lines are muted. Thank you. We have, I was at a bank based in the Midwest, and I managed the business banking platform, and that's where I became acquainted with Tealeaf. And what I hope to get across in this discussion is that, when you think about Tealeaf, you think about Acoustic, you may immediately think, marketing, and you would be 100% correct. Many marketing organizations highly leverage Tealeaf. But we have many customers in the finance and insurance industries that are able to get value out of Tealeaf in many other areas of their organization, and we're gonna talk about some of those today. So for an agenda, very briefly, I'm going to give a quick overview of what Tealeaf is. I'm going to walk through some screenshots, cover some feature functions, but it's going to be very brief. Don't want to spend the majority of our time here. Want to talk about what kind of value you can get out of Tealeaf, and we're going to talk specifically about real-life use cases that our customers have in place today. They're real success stories, and then we'll close it out. So what is Tealeaf? Tealeaf gives you the ability to capture, replay, and then perform advanced analytics on your digital channels. I like to compare this and contrast it to products that many people are familiar with, like, say, Adobe Analytics or Google Analytics. Those are tag-based products. You have to explicitly state, tag something to capture data on it. Tealeaf doesn't work that way. It captures everything. All user sessions, all pages, all user interactions on a page every single time. No tagging required whatsoever. With that, it's easy to understand. You get limitless, reporting and data segmentation. You can create highly customizable dashboards on anything that's in your application. Again, no tagging. If it's in your app, you can report on it. You have the ability to look at, say, all of your applications at an enterprise level. You can look at them from an organization level, an individual application level, individual processes within a page, individual pages, interactions on a page, and then all the underlying code underneath. You can go from enterprise, again, to individual elements on a page and run analytics on all of it. With that, you also have the ability to replay sessions. you can see exactly what your customers are doing within your applications, what they're experiencing, and you also see how your site is responding to the customer, and whether they're, it's presenting errors or they're able to, complete the things that, they're trying to execute. We have funnel reporting. Funnel reporting gives you the ability to track processes. So an enrollment is an example. We're able to show you step by step in that process where users may be struggling, where they're dropping out of the process. But more importantly, we're able to tell you the difference between, did they just abandon the process and walk away from it, or did they experience some sort of struggle or issue or error that caused them to leave the process? You're going to want to treat those two groups very, very differently. One, you may just want to retarget. Others, you have to address the root cause of the problem first. And then with all of these buckets, you have the ability to drill into them, see the list of individual sessions that made up these numbers, and replay them to confirm everything. We have anomaly detection, so any metric that you want to track on your site. Logins is an example. You know that there's going to be a certain number of failed logins. People mistype user ID passwords all the time. But what happens when it's out of the norm? Tealeaf, over time, learns what's normal, identifies a band of what it would consider normal activity, and when you go outside that band, it'll identify it as an anomaly. Now that is, it's very interesting information by itself, but where Tealeaf takes it the next step is that it will also analyze the underlying data and try and identify what it considers are contributing factors. As an example, if a new version of a browser was released and you had issues with logins, Tealeaf would be able to identify that all these failed logins seem to have this new version of the browser, as a common contributing factor. We have struggle analytics, where you're able to identify what percentage of sessions are the users experiencing struggle. And there's a number of default metrics that it looks at, but this is also very customizable, where you can add and then weight, any item within your application that you may think is an indicator of struggle. That clicked the help button, they went to the sitemap, abandoned a cart, etc. Those are all things that you can add into this to then develop objective data, scoring struggle. This gives you, really good insight, say both before and then after, say, an upgrade. Did you just make your site more or less intuitive? We have what's called data exchange. This is a product that allows all the Acoustic products to integrate and exchange information, but it also integrates with many, many other products. I believe we're up to over 130 applications that that Exchange can automatically communicate with. Where this can come in handy is, say, you want to automatically an application, or maybe your fraud team wants a more granular level of detail on what your users are doing within an application. All that data can be moved from Tealeaf via data exchange to those products. Automated alerting, where if the alert goes out via email, a link is included that will show a report of exactly when the alert or when the error occurred, when it started, all the customers, all the sessions that were impacted, the ability to drill all the way into the sessions and watch the actual errors to confirm everything. We have form analytics, where you can analyze an individual form, on a single page. Are the customers struggling completing that form? Where are they dropping out of that particular process? Heat mapping, and it's not just blobs on a page. This is, more intelligent heat mapping, where you can look at, the, activity based on criteria, like users may have come in via a campaign code, or, by this particular customer type. Obviously, you can see if users are clicking on areas that aren't actual calls to action. And then we have attention maps. It'll show you the average fold of every page, where if your call to action is below that fold, the majority of your customers are not seeing what you want them to see. We have accessibility assessments, where This will tell you if customers would be struggling using your site, say if they were blind or colorblind. The violations are highlighted, very easy to click on them. They tell you exactly what the violation is and exactly what you need to do to correct it. And then everything that we've talked about also applies to native iOS and Android platforms. Those are fully supported as well. All right, so that was very, very quick, intentionally, high-level, Tealeaf features. Now we want to talk about, all right, how are customers getting value from those features? And what this slide shows is just a handful of real-life use cases from our customers. And I want to highlight that it's really across the enterprise. Where this can be advantageous is if anyone's looking to bring in a product like this, having more organizations within your company leveraging the product only makes it a more viable option, especially if you have multiple budgets to spread it across. So what we're going to do, we're going to talk about a handful of these, and it's not going to cover them all, but if there are any that I don't cover and you'd like to have additional detail, please note it in the chat and we'll follow up with you after this call. So let's just jump into some of these. So your business lines. Your business lines are responsible for coming up with products, that are going to generate revenue. In this particular example, a business line identified a potential problem based on customer reports. Customers were complaining that they were trying to deposit checks via a mobile device, and it was failing. It was coming back with a system error. Problem was when the call centers, when they were investigating this, app worked just fine. They would call the vendor who was providing the service. Vendor said, everything seems to be working fine for us. And so it was like chasing a ghost. And that went on for quite a while. Over time, though, once they got Tealeaf, now they were able to see all of these interactions, and a pattern just jumped out at them. They were able to see that at peak times, early morning, business hours, there was this spike in system errors, where the actual message system error was put in front of the customer, and that they were not only able to see the counts of it occurring, they were able to see the dollar amounts that the customers were attempting to deposit, total $50,000 per day on average. What they also found, which they weren't even looking for, was we have $275,000 a day in failed deposit attempts due to what we were classifying as user error that no one was paying attention to because they were just considered user errors. So now that they had this data, they were able to go back to the vendor and hold the vendor accountable, get them to fix these system errors, which they did. And then they were able to revisit these processes, that were creating what were called system errors. One example was that the back of the check wasn't endorsed. Well, they weren't telling the user that the endorsement wasn't there until way at the very end of the process when they hit submit. They were to re-engineer these processes and provide validation up front, allowing the user to correct the issue and then continue on without getting the failure way at the end. It's hard to tell, what, deposits will eventually get, become successful. They'll try over and over and eventually the deposit will work, or, they'll deposit it by some other means, but you have to believe some didn't make it. 1% of this is over $1 million annually. I mean, those are some staggering numbers. Vendor management. I'm sure many of your applications are similar to the ones that I've worked on in the past. These are not single applications. They are a suite of services. Both some are homegrown, some are purchased but hosted in your own data center. Others are purchased and integrated but hosted at the third party's data center. And together they make up your product. How do you keep tabs on these vendors, especially when the services aren't even hosted in your own data center? you are 100%, relying on their reporting as to whether or not they met their own SLAs in the contracts that you had with them. With Tealeaf, once you put Tealeaf on these vendor services, you have complete visibility. You can see when it's up, when it's throwing errors, when there are issues. And now you have the ability to hold them accountable, both month to month, if that's the way the contract is structured, or during contract negotiation times. I've even heard of some customers, they were able to put vendors on watch lists and terminate contracts because now they were able to see issues that vendors were denying. So these applications are all branded as you. They're not branded as your vendors. This gives you the ability to maintain your reputation. Call centers use Tealeaf extensively in a number of ways. When calls come into a call center, the rep, there's a dilemma there initially. Is this just a one-off issue? User can't log in. So is it just an issue with that particular user, or maybe is it a sporadic issue, which is something that's very, very common, or is there a complete outage? Tealeaf, via a monitor in a call center or a report or an alert, can make call center reps know immediately if there are system issues that could be causing problems with customers. We even have some call centers where there's monitors up on the wall where the moment Tealeaf identifies something, it displays, and all the call center rep has to do is pick their head up and look, and they would be able to tell, oh, all right, we're seeing an issue, or no, and which leads us to believe that it's probably just a user issue. Reps can also replay sessions. They can replay historical sessions, and they can replay active sessions that the users, the customers that are calling in, are actually in at that time. That helps them understand the nature of the issue and get to the bottom of it much quicker. All this will help reduce the amount of time it takes to resolve an issue. And if you've ever worked in a call center, mean time to resolution is one of their key metrics. Another call center example, and this is eliminating calls to your call center altogether. All applications have upgrades and releases and patches. Every time you touch an application, you introduce risk and you add the potential to break something. We have many, many cases where an application would have been upgraded, say at 3 in the morning, or a patch was applied at 3 in the morning. If you're a financial institution, you probably have customers in there at that time. Customers use these systems 24/7, but they will rarely, if ever, call outside of business hours or if it's critical. Think about your own, how you would treat an issue. If you're at home at 10 o'clock at night, you log into your banking or insurance site and you get an error. I mean, do you pick up a phone and call? Most likely no. You just set your computer aside and try again later. Tealeaf sees all of these issues and can report on the very first occurrence. So if a release goes in at 3, it could be fixed by 3:15 instead of waiting until 7, 8 o'clock when the traffic starts to ramp up and now customers are getting frustrated and begin to call. Your fraud teams use Tealeaf also in a number of ways. Here's 2 examples. Fraud scoring. So fraud teams typically have a variety of tools at their disposal to collect information, analyze it, and determine where potential fraud could occur, or if it did occur, where else it could occur. In this example here, you have features in your applications that are there by design. You can change your password, you can change your email address, you can register a new mobile device, you can turn notifications on and off, and then you can execute any type of financial transaction or purchase. But the fraud team, they have to, we don't want to have them weed through millions and millions of sessions. All right, you want to highlight the ones that have the most potential. So we have the ability to score individual actions. In this case, the user logs in, looks at account balance, looks at transaction detail, and goes away. highly unlikely there's fraud related to that. But the user logs in, changes an email, turns off notifications, say on bill pays or funds transfer, and then tries to move money out of the bank. Again, may not be fraud, but the suspicion is certainly much higher with that one than on the previous. So either notifications could be sent directly to a fraud team, or reports can be provided that then, now they're able to zero in on the very specific, set of sessions that have the highest potential for fraud. I did mention this briefly earlier, but there's a tremendous amount of data, both in terms of, the device and location and user activity, that's being captured with Tealeaf. All of that data is phenomenal data that fraud teams love. Many of our customers will then export the data from Tealeaf directly into the fraud tools to, give that group, much better visibility, into what's happening. And then if a known fraud situation occurs, you also have the ability to go look what else did that person, or, by IP address or user ID or device ID, what else did they do in our environment? Elder abuse, horrible, it happens, but it's something that that does occur. In this example, it shows you that Tealeaf can, near real time, catch activity to hopefully prevent fraud. In this case, we had a number of situations where you have a group of customers that are the brick and mortar customer. They like to go to the branches, they deposit at the teller windows, they withdraw money from the teller. They don't use mobile banking. Well, when they all of a sudden enroll for mobile banking and now try to move money out of their account, it is suspicious. So here, once a user would enter in a birth date that put the user over the age of 80, an alert was immediately sent to the fraud team, and they were on the phone trying to validate that this was a valid enrollment before the enrollment process was even complete. Tremendous help in eliminating this type of fraud. Your information security teams, they too have a suite of tools at their disposal to analyze and protect your environments. Where they got value, or where they do get value out of Tealeaf, is when you think of the activity. When we talk about activity against your site, we tend to typically focus in on the real users, the actual customers. But there's a tremendous amount of activity that is being executed against your site. That's all automated. In one case, I know it was over 30% of the traffic hitting a particular site. They were not real users. It was all automated traffic. Aggregators, this is an example that a number of our customers have leveraged Tealeaf for. Aggregators are sites that are going to crawl your site and gather information. In the financial world, it'd be companies like Intuit. They have products like Mint or Quicken or QuickBooks. You would give them your online banking credentials. Then they log into your site, download your account balances and transactions and details, and then give you an aggregated view of your finances. Well, when they do that, they hammer these financial sites fairly hard. And we have numerous cases where they have ended up negatively impacting the performance of the site because they were doing these very specific tasks at a very, very high rate. So via Tealeaf, they're able to identify this activity, distinguish it from an actual user going in to check their balances, provide that data back to Intuit, work with them to throttle the requests, and it eliminated the negative customer impact. We have another example where an IT department was actually executing a penetration test. They contracted a firm to execute a penetration test on their own systems. And unfortunately, it negatively impacted the performance of the site because of how it was being executed. It just hammered their site trying to break in at such a rate that it was causing performance issues for real customers. Tealeaf was able to identify that, and they were able to modify the scripts so that it didn't happen again in the future. Then you also have real attacks. There's bad people out there, and they're trying to hack in, and it doesn't even seem like they want to accomplish anything. In many cases, they're just trying to disrupt a site. The information security groups, so they'll have products like Prolexic from Akamai. That's their DDoS prevention tool, as an example. Well, those products have to be tuned. They're going to allow certain traffic in, and then it's configured to block other traffic. Bad guys, you know, they kind of understand these rules, and they're always trying to figure a way to sneak past, and on occasion they do. Have examples where they were able to, you know, an attack came in, they were able to negatively impact the site. Then the information security group was able to analyze that traffic, understand how it was constructed, how it was executed, you know, obviously where it came from, and then they were able to better tune the DDoS preventive measures to prevent it from happening again. Your audit team. Users, in this particular example, users were complaining about overdraft fees because they said that the bank stopped sending paper statements. How do I know my balance if I don't get my statement? Well, with Tealeaf being able to capture every interaction every time, now you're able to show, you know, the customer that at such and such time, you did log in, you were prompted with a question, would you like to disable paper statements, go paperless? You acknowledged yes and confirmed. You can oftentimes provide screen prints of that. And in this particular case, it ended up being, you know, a monthly audit report that was provided to basically combat any of these, you know, accusations that were coming in. And then lastly, your executives. You know, executives probably aren't going to use the tool directly, but they'll love the information. What this example is about, most organizations, you know, you're going to have an operational, maybe a daily meeting where you review the prior day. Did you have any issues? If you did, what was the impact? You know, how significant were there? And oftentimes you score your day. And, you know, operational groups are then, they'll rank every day, green, yellow, red. Green, we had no issues. Yellow, maybe moderate. Red, we had significant. Problem is, oftentimes this is subjective, where if someone just screamed really loud or the wrong customer was impacted, all right, one day it would be green or yellow, the next day it's red. My favorite example here is we had one customer where the CEO's wife submitted a wire that failed, and before you knew it, there were dozens of people on a phone call trying to determine what was wrong with the wire system. The day was originally categorized as red, and why that's impactful is, like most organizations, there's processes around that. If you have a red day, now you have a lot of paperwork. You have to understand what happened, who was impacted, what were the costs associated with it, what was the estimated, revenue loss, how was it able to happen to begin with? What are we going to do to prevent it from happening in the future? When are those changes going to be done? There's all kinds of questions, that need to be answered, when you have critical issues. This turned out to be a user error. All right. With Tealeaf, you're able to identify these things immediately. And what you find is that executives, when an issue hits, oftentimes the Tealeaf teams are the first people that are being called because they're the ones who can accurately quantify what is actually happening and provide, the data that would supplement, these type of reports. So with that, that was the last example that I wanted to cover. And it's really, it kind of wraps up our webinar. Hope you found it informative. Would love to talk with any of you if you have further questions or If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to post them in the chat. And with that, thank you very much for attending and have a great weekend.